Alright, so we just finished up our unit on geology. We discussed the different layers of the Earth. We talked about continental drift and plate tectonics, as well as earthquakes and volcanoes. For this unit, we're going to continue talking about that outermost layer of our planet, which is the crust. And we're going to discuss soil, weathering, and mass movement. More importantly, we're going to discuss soil with this unit. But before we can discuss soil, we need to talk about how soil is formed, and that process is known as weathering. So, the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what is weathering? Think about what's happening and how does it happen. So, weathering can be defined as the breaking down and changing of rocks near the Earth's surface. On Earth's surface, we have all these different rocks that are exposed to the elements, and as different processes happen, they're going to begin to break down and weather. Usually associated with weathering are two other terms. Those terms are erosion and deposition. We have weathering, which is the breakdown of rock material near Earth's surface. And then we have erosion, which is going to be the transport of those materials that have been broken down. And finally, we have deposition. We had these materials that are weathered, meaning they were broken down into smaller units. They were eroded, which means they were transferred from their or transported from their original location. And now they've been deposited in a new location. They have a new home. So we have weathering, erosion, and deposition. We have two different types of weathering that we are going to discuss. The first one is mechanical weathering. I want you to pause for a minute and think about, what does mechanical weathering mean? And does mechanical weathering, or will mechanical weathering, affect the composition of a material? So, mechanical weathering can be defined as physical forces breaking rock into smaller pieces without changing the rock's composition. Each new piece has the same composition as the original rock. While this does not change the rock's composition, it does increase the surface area. So I want you to look at how mechanical weathering in the diagrams below has affected the surface area. While we still have a rock, the same amount of rock that we began with, we now have more exposed surface area in the third block than we have in the first original block. There are several different processes that we are going to discuss that are associated with mechanical weathering. The first one is frost wedging. I want you to pause for a minute to think about, what do you think frost wedging is? See if you can come up with your own definition in your own words, and then continue on with your notes. Frost wedging can be defined as using the expansion of freezing water in cracks and crevices. Eventually, what happens is these rocks break into smaller pieces, and once they've been broken into smaller pieces, they're wedged loose, and when they're wedged loose, they begin to fall to the bottom of the cliff, or the cliff where they were originally located, and they form this pile of rocks, which we call talus. So we have a crack in a rock, a small crack. We begin with a small crack in the rock, and water gets into that rock. And as the seasons change, the temperature changes. The temperature gets lower, the water freezes. When water freezes, it expands, and then again, it the temperature warms up. The crack is now widened, so when more water gets into it, it's going to freeze and expand again, widening the crack, and eventually that rock is going to be wedged loose. And once it's wedged loose, it's going to fall to a pile at the bottom of the slope, and it's going to accumulate into a pile of debris, which is known as talus or talus. Our next process associated with mechanical weathering is unloading. Unloading is the uplift and erosion of rocks overlying igneous rocks due to pressure that is on the rocks being reduced. When this happens, we get exfoliation where the outer rock is now separated and broken loose from the entire rock unit. So the pressure on the rocks is reduced, which results in unloading. So the pressure is the pressure is reduced. Those rocks now begin to uplift, but as they uplift, you get exfoliation where these outer slabs are broken loose. Also associated with mechanical weathering, we have biological activity. I want you to pause for a moment and think about how biological activity is going to affect mechanical weathering. So, with biological activity, we have these different plants and burrowing animals, as well as humans, that are going to affect the breakdown or contribute to the breakdown of rock and earth material. For example, we have plant roots that can grow down into rocks, and when they grow into rocks, they begin to break those apart, therefore aiding in the process of mechanical weathering. Our second type of weathering is chemical weathering. So I want you to pause for a minute and think about these questions. First, what is chemical weathering? Also, think about how do you think mechanical weathering is going to aid chemical weathering? When we had mechanical weathering was that breakdown of the earth and rock material into smaller pieces without changing the chemical composition, but it increased the surface area. And now we're going to have chemical weathering. Think about what it is and how mechanical weathering affects chemical weathering. Chemical weathering is the transformation of rocks into one or more new compounds. So, with chemical weathering, we are now changing the composition of the rock. So, I ask you how mechanical weathering is going to affect chemical weathering. With mechanical weathering, we increase the surface area. In chemical weathering, there's going to be more surface area increase or exposed due to mechanical weathering. So that's going to increase the rate of chemical weathering. Agents and evidence of chemical weathering. One of the most important agents of chemical weathering is water. I want you to think about why water is the most important agent of chemical weathering. I also want you to think about what are some examples. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Think about what are some examples or evidences of chemical weathering. So, one reason why water is the most important agent of weathering is because it picks up carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide in the air, which forms it into this sort of acidic solution or acid rain. So if you've ever been to an old graveyard or an old cemetery and you looked at the tombstones, those that are made out of marble are a little more weathered because of the acid rain and other environmental aspects have weathered it away more quickly than you would a granite tombstone, which is a little more rigid and it's a little more sturdy than the marble headstone. So let's talk about the rate of weathering. I want you to pause for a minute and think about what are some things that would speed up weathering? Also, what are some things that would slow down weathering? And what does the term solubility mean to you? So, the rate of weathering basically refers to how fast the rocks are going to erode. Are they going to erode fast or are they going to erode slow? So, remember back to our granite headstone and our marble headstone, one of those is going to erode faster than the other one, basically due to two factors. One factor is going to be the mineral composition and solubility of the rock or earth material. Solubility refers to a material's ability to be dissolved. So the marble headstone is going to dissolve or be dissolved a lot faster and it's weathered a lot faster than the granite headstone. Another factor is going to be climate. So think about if that marble headstone was in a climate that had a high temperature and a high moisture content. The rate of weathering is gonna be increased even more due to the climate and of that region. Chemical weathering is favored more in temperatures that in climates that have a high temperature and an abundant moisture content. This concludes your notes on weathering, which gives you a little bit of background information to how soil is formed or the main process that is evolved in soil formation, which is weathering. Tomorrow we will discuss more in detail how soil is formed, the different types of soil, and soil composition. And this concludes your notes for day one of the soil unit.